Hello again, this is Casey Skoog, and welcome to segment 2 of Constraining X-bar theory. First, let's do a quick review of the lexicon, the theta criterion, and the proposition theta rule. And then we'll move on to expletives, aka pleonastic pronouns, the extended projection principle, expletive insertion, and finally, the computational component. Theta criterion. Remember that the theta criterion states that each argument is assigned one and only one theta role, and that each theta role is assigned one and only one argument. So the theta grid helps filter out ungrammatical sentences like Master gave, or Master gave Dobby a sock, a boot. So the theta grid represents how lexical items and the information linked to those items is stored in our lexicon. More specifically, as lexical items, predicate verbs do more than limit how many arguments are allowed. They also restrict the types of thematic relations and theta roles their arguments may be assigned. That is so, we also avoid nonsense sentences like, the sock loves Dobby. Now we should recall the clausal argument theta role, aka proposition, which applies to sentences like, that Dobby is free is apparent, and it is apparent that Dobby is free. Furthermore, predicates such as is apparent and is likely take only one theta role. That leads us to expletives, aka pleonastic pronouns. These pronouns serve a specific purpose and are not assigned theta roles. They accompany a certain type of verbs that would otherwise violate something called the extended projection principle, which, in quoting Carney on page 238, states that all clauses must have subjects, i.e., the specifier of the tense phrase must be filled by a determiner phrase or a clause phrase, and lexical information is expressed at all levels. Recall the proposition, it is likely that Dobby is free. The pronoun it is actually empty and only serves to substitute for an empty subject. Verbs, like those about weather, also do not take arguments. It will snow. It is still raining. These expletives only accompany such verbs in order to avoid violating the extended projection principle, and these are applied by the expletive insertion rule. This is so that the extended projection principle constraint can be followed. A quick note. Watch out for neuter pronouns, which are distinct from expletives. Neuter pronouns actually bear theta roles, whereas expletives are only placeholders for the otherwise empty subject. For instance, in statements like, it is hopeless, or you found it, actually refer to real entities. Here is a quick exercise. Can you spot which it is? It is hopeless. It is not going to snow, and classes will not be canceled. And we have to present it tomorrow. So even though we're not ready, we'll just have to do it anyway. Since there is a difference between expletive pronouns and neuter pronouns, it is important to know which is which. So now that we know about the following, the lexicon, where the theta grid is, X-bar rules, the theta criterion, the expletive insertion rule, and the extended projection principle, we can now view Kearney's preliminary diagram of the computational component. The computational component is the computing side of processing and generating grammatical and semantically appropriate sentences that make sense. This diagram illustrates how we are able to make judgments about sentences and whether they meet selectional restrictions and whether they are grammatical or not. So, by now, you should know the following about the constraints on X-bar theory. Lexical items have semantic and grammatical information tied to them, and they are stored in our lexicon. In failing to account for such information about predicates and their respective arguments, we can apply the constraint of the theta criterion using theta grids, and the expletive insertion rule to follow the extended projection principle, to help make grammaticality judgments. And that concludes segment 2 of the X-bar theory constraints.